China may have had millions of coronavirus infections. The Chinese military launches an important rocket. And Justin Trudeau stands up to China. Yes, you heard that right. That and more on this week's China News Headlines. Welcome to China Uncensored. I'm Chris Chappell. Well, I've got some good news for the coronavirus. It may not have just infected tens of thousands of people in China. It could actually have infected 2.2 million people, and that's just in Hubei Province. Like I said, it's good news from the perspective of the virus. It's been very successful at spreading. It would definitely win at Plague Inc. Of course, that could be bad news for humans. In a study published earlier this month, microbiologists at the University of Hong Kong tested 452 people who evacuated from Hubei Province to Hong Kong back in March. None of them had symptoms of the CCP virus, but 4% of them tested positive for CCP virus antibodies. According to the study, with a population of 59 million, our findings indicate that about 2.2 million people in Hubei could have been infected. That's more than 30 times higher than what Chinese officials reported. It's hard to be sure with such a small sample size. And actually, the scientists think that 4% may be an underestimate. But this could actually be good news for humans. It could mean the vast majority of people who've been infected never showed symptoms. And that means the CCP virus is not nearly as deadly as we thought. But it's also bad news, because if only 4% of people had the coronavirus in Hubei, the worst hit part of China, that's not enough to protect people from future waves of the virus. Meanwhile, my favorite Chinese state-run media, the Global Times, accused the Hong Kong University research team of publishing the study to help the United States attack China. No matter what, I can always depend on the Global Times. But China has more immediate disasters to worry about. Just this week, there were massive floods in southern China and huge tornadoes in northern China. And most frightening of all, a snake that laid eggs in a family's washing machine. Those eggs can only mean one thing. We're about to see a lot more snakes. Or an omelet. Of course, all disasters in China, whether natural or man-made, are opportunities for Chinese state-run media to show how great, glorious, and correct the Chinese Communist Party is. Like this article. But the U.S. State Department disagrees. They've just designated 4 more Chinese state-run news organizations that have offices in the U.S. as foreign missions. Those are China Central Television, China News Service, the People's Daily, and, my favorite, the Global Times. The State Department designated them foreign missions because, while Western media are beholden to the truth, PRC media are beholden to the Chinese Communist Party. Hey, that's a little unfair. Not all Western media are beholden to the truth. At any rate, these 4 Chinese state-run media organizations joined 5 others that were given the same designation back in February. In response, the editor-in-chief of the Global Times defended it as a market-oriented media, which is true in a sense, because this is their market. 105 Chinese soldiers flew to Russia this month to participate in their Victory Day parade. In Russia, Victory Day celebrates that time in 1945 when Germany surrendered to Russia after World War II. Now, it doesn't matter that Germany and Russia are both run by completely different governments than they were in 1945. It's still an excuse to show off your soldiers. And why not let your friends from China join? With no face masks or social distancing. Russia's Victory Day parade was originally scheduled for May 9th. It was postponed because of the coronavirus, and then it was rescheduled for this month. It's a show of strength ahead of an important constitutional vote that could give Vladimir Putin 2 more terms as president, lasting until 2036. At age 83, would he still look good shirtless on a horse? Good thing this show isn't Russia Uncensored. The Chinese military has successfully launched into orbit the 35th and final satellite of its Beidou navigation system. Beidou is China's knockoff GPS. Of course, there are few other advantages to a country having its own satellite navigation network than prestige. Well, I can think of an advantage. For years, China's military has been relying on America's GPS for navigation. But with Beidou up and running, they don't have to worry about the US shutting off their access if there's a war. So now the Chinese military can feel free to start World War III without worrying about whether or not to make a left turn at Taipei or continue straight for 1,000 kilometers to invade Manila. Speaking of attacks, Canada. Yeah, bet you didn't think I was going to say Canada. But apparently, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has attacked China, at least with strong words, over China's political detention of 2 Canadians. As I mentioned last week, China has officially charged Canadian citizens Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor with spying. Everyone knows that those charges are a political retaliation for Canada's continued detention of Huawei CFO Meng Wanzhou. Now, Trudeau has not always shown strength over the years when it comes to standing up to the Chinese regime. I mean, he's literally a panda hugger. But this week, Trudeau told reporters in Ottawa that it has been obvious from the beginning that this was a political decision made by the Chinese government and we deplore it. And he said he will not simply trade Meng Wanzhou for the Canadian citizens, because anyone who is considering weakening our values or weakening the independence of our justice system doesn't understand the importance of our values. Wow, Trudeau has really toughened up. Must be the beard. And finally, things may seem bad with China right now, but CNBC has some advice for you on how to trade Chinese stocks during rising tensions with the US and a pandemic. Focus on Chinese A shares. Be selective in picking US-listed Chinese companies. And increase exposure to consumer stocks. Right. Can I just say, there's only one good way to trade Chinese stocks right now. Sell. And now it's time for me to answer a question from a viewer who supports China Uncensored through Patreon. Logan asks, has there been any efforts by the CCP to influence/escalate the civil unrest in the USA? Good question, Logan. I've seen some media reports about this, and they reference this video from a protest in Washington where you can hear someone in Chinese yelling something like, "Quick, let's go, let's go." That probably means at least 2 Chinese people were at the protest. But that doesn't mean the CCP was behind it. And in Seattle, 2 Chinese students showed off the Gucci bags they looted because, that's patriotism. But again, that doesn't mean the CCP is behind it. Chinese state-run media has praised the protests, saying the West needs to respect Black Lives Matter. And they've also used the protests to highlight America's hypocrisy and human rights failure. Because when it comes to Hong Kong, where people should definitely not be allowed to protest, Trump wanting to quell violent riots in the US is a double standard that is being mocked on the Chinese internet, according to Chinese state-run media. So Logan, I haven't seen any evidence that the CCP is directly influencing or escalating the George Floyd protests, but they are happy to use them to criticize the US. Thanks for your question. And thank you for watching. Be like Logan and contribute $1 or more per episode to help keep China Uncensored going. Go to patreon.com/China Uncensored to learn more. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.